Good morning. Today's presentation is going to be about something very important. If you are a language teacher, you have to know about three main concepts that are going to be clarified and explained in the coming slides. These concepts are approach, method, and technique. If you are a novice teacher or you have never read anything about them, you are likely to be confused and to find them similar, but they are very different. And my job in this presentation is to clarify how they differ from each other. So this is exactly what we are going to do in the coming slides. And without further ado, let's begin. So just to give you an idea about how I will proceed in this short presentation, I'm going to talk first about approach, then I will move to talk about technique before concluding the entire presentation with the meaning of a method. According to Longman Dictionary of Applied Linguistics, an approach refers to the theory, philosophy, and principles underlying a particular set of teaching practices. There are other definitions that describe an approach as a set of assumptions, beliefs, and theoretical views about the nature of language. So what do we learn from this definition? I will try to be as simple as possible to clarify the meaning of an approach. So, let's start from the beginning. We all know that there are scholars, there are scientists, and linguists who investigated how adults or children learn a second or a foreign or a first language. These scholars, let's mention for example Skinner, Vygotsky, Chomsky, they tried to describe how we, human beings, learn a second or a first language. Their descriptions included several principles and assumptions regarding the process of learning or teaching a language. Some of them said that learning a language starts with the learner knowing absolutely nothing about that language. They think of the learner as someone who has absolutely nothing in his mind. He comes to the class without any prior knowledge, and that learner is ready to receive the lessons explained inside the classroom. Obviously, this is the behavioristic approach to language learning. If you adopt this approach, when you come to the classroom, you are going to see learners as blank slates. They have no prior knowledge about the things you intend to explain to them. You will also think that when teaching happens, learning happens. And this is another assumption on which the behavioristic approach to language learning is based. Behaviorism assumes that the process of teaching and learning is based on a stimulus and response. You are going to explain, and the learner is expected to understand and keep the things you explain to them in mind, which is not the case in most of the classrooms. This is another weak point in this approach. So, another teacher may opt for another approach, that is to say, another way of doing something. If you look for the meaning of approach in the dictionary, you are likely to find a way of doing something. This is the meaning of an approach. And in the case of teaching and learning languages, it is the theories and the assumptions that have been mentioned over the years by linguists and specialists who investigated this field of language learning. In contrast to behaviorism, we can mention, for example, constructivism. This is another approach to language learning which doesn't think of the learners as passive recipients of knowledge, but it sees them as active participants. They are going to build on prior knowledge. They don't come to the class knowing nothing, but they come knowing something, and they have to accommodate the new knowledge with their prior knowledge. Cognitivism and behaviorism are two different theories or approaches to language learning. It's up to you as a teacher to choose the one you like, the one which works with the students you teach. Now let's move to the second concept, which is method. A method is a way of teaching. And here, many people would say that a method is synonymous with an approach, which is not. They are very, very different from each other. So, a method is an application of views on how a language is best taught and learned. Please, I would like you to pay attention here. There is a key word in this sentence, which is application. An approach is completely theoretical. A method is purely practical. We will see how. So far, I mentioned an approach to language learning, which is behaviorism. I said that the behavioristic approach to language learning sees learners as passive recipients of knowledge. You tell them something, you ask them to repeat after you, and learning happens. This is behaviorism. In this case, if we want to apply the principles and the assumptions of the behavioristic approach, we need a method, because behaviorism is just a theory. And the method which is going to apply the assumptions and the ideas behind the behavioristic approach is, for example, the audiolingual method. The audiolingual method is purely behavioristic and mechanic. It requires the learners to keep repeating what their teacher says. That's why in many articles and books we can find approach, technique, method represented in the form of 3 circles that differ from each other in terms of their size. Approach is often the biggest circle, simply because it represents the ideas that will influence our choice of a method, and the method will influence our choice of the different techniques available to us to carry out an activity. So that's why they differ from each other. But we should always remember that an approach is purely theoretical, a method is purely practical. Now that I have set a clear-cutting line between a method and approach, we will move to talk about technique. In teaching, it is a specific procedure for carrying out a teaching activity, such as the way the teacher corrects students' errors or sets up group activities. Let's take an example. The PPP is an acronym for presentation, practice, and production. This is a technique we can use when teaching grammar or functions, for example. We start with presenting the lesson and finally giving students the chance to practice what have been covered before reaching the stage when they are required to produce their own sentences and examples. There is also visual aids such as pictures, data show. This is another technique that you can use. There is also drilling. Drilling is very important if you opt for the audiolingual method, because you will have to ask students to repeat what you say. And there are different types of drills. These are things that I will talk about in the coming presentations. So basically, this is all we have to say regarding the difference between technique, approach, and method. We have said that an approach is purely theoretical, a method is purely practical. Techniques serve the objectives of a method. They help us achieve our objectives and carry out teaching activities. So that's all I have to say for the difference between the 3 concepts. If you have any question, leave a comment below and I will answer you as soon as possible. Also, if you want me to speak about any concept, any theory, or if you don't agree with me on something, don't hesitate to leave a comment. Have a good day.